Guten Yardening. Today we're going to walk you through creating a vermiculture setup. Now you could go to the store and spend $50, $60, $70 buying a pre-made kit. But in this case we decided to go to the store and buy something a lot cheaper that's going to be just as effective. Now for those of you who don't know, vermiculture is using worms to create worm castings. In this case we're using red wigglers, which we'll show you in a little bit. So if you come on over, you'll see that we spent about $20 to get two Sterlite 23.8 gallon containers. Now these totes are a little bit more expensive than you have to spend, and they had some there for $4 or $5, but we want to make sure we're going to get as much life out of this as possible. Our goal is at least 5 years. Sterlite's website says that their plastic is all food safe, and that's extremely important for us because we're going to be using most of the worm castings for our food crop. So we did confirm on the bottom that the plastic is indeed food safe because you never want to be too safe. We bought two of these and each one about $10, and each serves a different purpose. The first layer, the bottom layer, is going to be used to catch the worm leachate. That's the juice, the liquid that is created by the worms in this process. Worm leachate is different than worm tea or worm compost tea, and we'll talk about that in a different episode. But the first piece requires some spacing and some area for the leachate to fall. So we've put 3 bricks, 3 pavers that you can buy for 50 or 60 cents each down in the bottom. That's going to create enough space so that when we sit the second container in, you're going to have plenty of room for the air holes. So if you'll notice, I actually put 2 rows of air holes the whole way around the top of this container. That's extremely important when it comes to the air flow. The worms will be sick at the very least, and in all likelihood will die if you don't have a good enough source of circulation. In addition, I put a few holes in the bottom. You want to make sure that the holes go in the lowest spot, but also a few in the middle as well, just to encourage that liquid to run down. Now there are a lot of opinions as to hole size when it comes to the drill bit. I use 3/16 inch. I find that gives plenty of circulation. Others have claimed that you need an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch, and some have even bigger 1/2 inch holes, but I don't think that that's necessary. In this case, we use just a simple 3/16 inch bit. I think that's one of the things that's so cool about this setup is we really required one tool to do the entire work. Well, that's not exactly true. We required 2 tools just to save some time. In the second layer, we have the bedding. And this is where that second tool came in handy because I took a lot of newspaper, a lot of cardboard, and shredded it using a paper shredder. If you don't have a paper shredder, you can certainly take the time and rip and tear the pieces of paper individually, but this saved us a lot of effort. So this bedding is going to be composed of a few different ingredients, but the first and foremost piece is this paper. This is nice. Lots of airflow is going to happen in between this. The worms will be able to move around quite comfortably, and they actually like this stuff. They like to eat it, and it's going to help with the composting, with the castings. The second piece that we're going to add to this bedding is going to be some coco cure. Now, in our area, for some reason, coco cure is in short supply. Most of the stores don't have it in stock, but really you can find this almost anywhere. I got these little bricks at a local pet store, and it's the exact same thing as you would buy if you went to a Walmart or a Home Depot or one of those garden centers. A little bit more expensive, but again, you got to do what you have to do sometimes. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to break this brick out and we're going to put the water in. The cool thing about coco cure is that it does retain water. That's important. You want there to be some moisture in the bed, but you have to also be careful because if you add too much water, too much liquid, what you're going to end up doing is causing the worms to move up to the surface, which is what you see them do whenever the rain comes and their tunnels get filled, and or they're going to die. So we have to be very consistent and very careful about how we leave the bedding. All right, let's get started. We have 3 small bricks of coco cure here, And this is actually smaller than what we typically buy, but each one of these is supposed to create 8 quarts. It's heavily condensed and concentrated stuff. So the instructions for this call for 1 gallon of water, and we have a couple of rain barrels around the house, and so we're actually going to use our rainwater. All right, you can see that this starts absorbing the water right away, and they say you can just let it sit in here by itself. I like to help the process along just a little bit, make things go a little bit faster, but you can watch it expand almost immediately. It just starts to fall away nicely there. And as this is the first time we're using this brick size, as we see the 1 gallon measurement that the container recommends, we're going to know pretty quickly, I think, whether or not that's too much moisture. And if it is, that's absolutely fine. What we'll do is we'll just add a little bit more of the cocoa cure. The cocoa cure has a nicer pH level. It's closer to neutral than a peat moss, which is more acidic. And so that's something the worms prefer. So this, if you can get your hands on cocoa cure, you'll be a lot happier than if you just put in some peat moss. It's also better for the environment. At first it looked like we weren't going to need this whole gallon, but I guess it really does. They must know what they're talking about on this packaging. It took about 10 minutes, but now the cocoa cure is finally fully hydrated, and that gallon of water did a great job. So we have 8 quarts of cocoa cure here, which should be plenty for us to put into our container. In addition to the cocoa cure, we're going to add a little bit of natural sand. So the sand is all natural, and we've sifted it to get out some of the bigger rocks. But this adds some of the grit that the worms are going to enjoy and help them get through the process of, well, processing their food. So about a cup of this sand, and mix it in nicely. Shouldn't take very long. So have some nice texture in there with the cocoa cure. Nice. Already assembled by putting the second container into the first container, our setup. And as you'll notice, both layers of holes are still perfectly exposed. Again, that's super important when it comes to having plenty of oxygen. At the bottom here, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 inches or so's worth of the paper, the newspaper, and the cardboard. And so we're going to just simply mix the cocoa cure and the sand right into this now. All right, so we've dumped the cocoa cure sand mix into the bedding, and now we're mixing it up just a little bit. Nice mixture so that the worms have no problem digging their way around. Again, you don't want this to be too moist, because they won't be happy, and you definitely don't want it to be too dry. Similarly, they won't be happy. So you can add water to this, and you probably will need to add water to this every once in a while. But just keep an eye on it to make sure you have a nice setup here. All right, some really nice bedding. Final step then is to add the worms. Now we're very fortunate we have a person locally who does composting for businesses, and he also happens to sell these red wigglers. And so these worms are in compost, very nice compost. I'll give you a nice up close look at them. You can see there's a whole bunch in there. So we have 1,000 of them. That's the equivalent of about a pound. So if you're looking online to try to buy these and you're looking for how many you need, we would say that about 1,000 would be good for something this size. They're going to reproduce very quickly, and they're going to eat a lot. Now, some people will tell you that you need to cover these up, but actually, if you just lay these worms out gently on top, they will start to work their way down. Look at that. They're nothing creepy about them. And they're going to probably move a little slowly at first because they'll be lethargic as they're introducing themselves to a brand new environment. We'll lay them out nicely. Maybe spread the ball just a little bit. You can feel some of the warmth from the compost they were in. So these worms are going to start to move down, and they will move down quite rapidly. But I think what's really important to remember is after the worms are in and you start feeding them, they are not going to want to go anywhere because you're going to feed them very well. So after the first, oh look, one of them stayed on my finger. He doesn't know. So after the first couple of weeks, you're going to notice that they settle in nicely, and there may be time when early on you have worms who are trying to crawl up the sides, worms that are trying to escape a little bit. So the best thing that you can do is to keep them well fed and also try to find a way to get them to settle in. We're going to add our scraps from our kitchen. So these are actually, for the most part, vegetables that we're already growing and consuming here on our little garden. And so we are able to take and eat and then transform that back into something even better. So we're going to put the vegetables in. We're going to feed them off to one side for now. We're not putting any citrus, so no fruits that are acidic. And we're not putting any onions in there. You want to give them items that they enjoy eating and items that are going to not upset them in any ways. You keep them happy. If you keep them happy, they'll reproduce quickly. And again, these eat typically between 2/3 and 3/4 of their body weight each day. So for a family our size, 1,000 worms, we're looking at probably feeding them about 4 to 5 pounds of scraps per week. So that's going to be our goal, to keep them happy. Okay, pause it. One of the ways to help the worms acclimate and to not crawl up the sides of your container early on is to put some nice moist paper on top of the bed. And so we don't have any newspaper here, so we used a brown bag, a brown grocery bag, paper bag, but it's all the same. So just moisten it a little and right over top. And we're actually going to create 2 layers. There's no harm in 2 layers. Just creates a nice extra barrier. And we'll keep that damp. And if we see any of the worms trying to make their way out, we'll be able to get them back down there. But again, if you're taking care of the worms, if you're feeding them well, if you're keeping the bedding at a nice level of moisture versus dryness, in general, you'll be in great shape. One more thing. You may see some recommendations to add holes to the top of the container. In our case, we're not adding any holes because we have plenty of air circulation from these 2 rows going around the sides, and we don't want any critters getting into our worms. So for $20, we have a setup that we can expand on. We can add another layer and another layer and another layer, as many as we want going forward. So we've created our own setup. It's going to be very simple, and it's going to be effective in producing that black gold. Well, folks, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We hope you learned something today. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell. And remember, when you're with us, you're good to grow.